universe is full of magical things patiently waiting for our wits to grow sharper. A very good morning to you all. I, Dr. Moitri Oja, a PG from JSS TCH, extend a warm welcome to everyone on the fourth day of the webinar. I find immense pleasure and exaltation to continue this webinar further. Like yesterday, we are proceeding our journey knowing diabetes and its impact on oral health. We all know that this disease is lethal. The basis of treatment is management of the complications by different approaches with the aim of providing a healthy life to diabetics. So for the final session of the webinar, we have Dr. Akila Prashant ma'am, who would enlighten us about genetic aspects of diabetes, and the session will be chaired by Dr. Divya P. Kumar ma'am. Now I request Dr. Anita ma'am to please introduce Dr. Divya P. Kumar ma'am. Over to you, ma'am.
Good morning and a warm welcome to Dr. Divya Prasanna Kumar. To introduce her, she's completed her BSc in Botany, Biochemistry and Microbiology from St. Philomena's College, Mysuru, MSc in Biotechnology from University of Mysore, PhD in Physiology and Biophysics from Virginia Commonwealth University, Richmond, Virginia, USA. She is currently working as Assistant Professor Ramalinga Swamy Fellow, Department of Biochemistry, CMR Lab, JSS Medical College. She has many publications on her name, and she is an associate editor in Frontiers in Oncology. Thank you for accepting to panel this session. I now request Dr. Divya to introduce our speaker of the day, Dr. Akila.
Hello. Good morning, all. Thanks, Sanita ma'am, for the invitation and chairing this session. It's been a pleasure seeing the progress and how successful the webinar has been conducted in the past 3 days. Thanks to the special interest group of diabetes and oral care. A hearty congratulations to all the members who are involved in this webinar conducting, because the past 3 days have been very successfully conducted. Indeed, it's been very informative. So moving on to the webinar, I'll introduce Dr. Akila Prashant. It's an honor to introduce Dr. Akila Prashant in this platform. Akila ma'am has been my colleague since 2 years, more importantly, a very good friend. It's a pleasure to introduce a physician scientist on this webinar. She has been doing great science in the field of biochemistry. Presently, she is the professor at the Department of Biochemistry, JSS Medical College. As you see in this slide, she has completed her MBBS from Adi Chunchandgiry Institute of Medical Science. She has also got her PhD degree in cancer biology from JSS Medical College and PG diploma in genomic medicine and healthcare. Akila ma'am, to her credit, has many publications, and she has been active in setting up medical genetic lab at JSS Medical College. She is also a member of the Medical Biochemist of India, Association of Clinical Biochemists of India, Indian Society of Human Genetics, American Society of Human Genetics, and other institutes as well. So just as an housekeeping instruction, before handing over it to Dr. Akila Prashant, I would request all the participants to type in their questions in the Q&A box so that we can actively discuss at the end of the session. So over to you, Akila ma'am.
Thank you, Divya, for the kind introduction. And of course, it was a knowledge piece since the past few days, which we have attended. And definitely a lot of information has been gathered through the talks which have been going on since the past few days. So I thank Dr. Anita for giving me this opportunity of presenting the genetic aspects of diabetes mellitus. So I'll start sharing my screen, and I would begin the talk by offering my sincere pranams to the lotus feet of His Holiness. Yeah. To begin with the genetic aspects of diabetes mellitus, I would outline the talk in the following headings. So I would keep the introduction very short, because I'm sure from the past 3 days you have learned a lot about diabetes mellitus and other conditions. So the introduction would be very short. I would probably go into the topic directly. by mentioning a few genes which are associated with the risk of type 1 diabetes mellitus, and then with the type 2 diabetes mellitus. And since we are on the forum of oral care, so I thought it would be right to discuss some of the genes which predict the oral pathology in diabetes mellitus, and of course the future directions, and finally the conclusion. So diabetes mellitus, as you know, it is a global health problem, and we, being in India, we kind of top the chart, as you can see here. Either it be in the prevalence of diabetes mellitus, we are on the top. The death numbers in diabetes mellitus, again, we are on the top. And the disability adjusted life years, again, here we are on the top. So it is a major concern, health concern for the population of the Indian population. And also we know that the Indian population is genetically quite diverse. We need to have some population specific data regarding why we are so prone for diabetes mellitus. So probably that kind of studies have not been done. I would be discussing that in the future directions. If I have to classify diabetes mellitus based on the genetic aspects, probably it would be the monogenic diabetes mellitus and polygenic diabetes mellitus. In monogenic, we have several types, that is MODY. There are different types of MODY, but this would not be the focus of my talk. I would be focusing more on the polygenic aspect of the diabetes mellitus, mainly to deal with the type 1 and the type 2 diabetes mellitus. So both are kind of polygenic in nature. To start with type 1 diabetes mellitus, so you can see the incidence rate of the childhood diabetes mellitus, that is type 1 diabetes mellitus. The areas marked with gray, these are the countries where we don't have the proper data about the type 1 diabetes mellitus incidence. But of course, if you see Indian population here, we are not at the top in the type 1 diabetes mellitus. Incidence is less than 5 per 100,000 population here in the Indian scenario with respect to type 1 diabetes mellitus. So in brief about the pathogenesis of type 1 diabetes mellitus, here we have, it is mainly autoimmune in nature. I'm sure all of you know about this. So here it is mainly the CD4 T cells and CD8 T cells. They play a very major role in type 1 diabetes mellitus and the pathogenesis of the autoimmune aspect of a type 1 diabetes mellitus. So here we can see that the islet antigens are presented by the dendritic cells to the islet antigen specific T cells, okay? And once activated, the CD4 and the CD8 cells, they are kind of they induce the immune response against the beta cells of the pancreas, and they destruct the beta cells. Also, we have the autoantibodies which are generated by the interaction of these B cells with the beta cell autoantigens, and they also synthesize more of these autoantibodies which come and destruct the beta cells. So in case of type 1 diabetes, which is mainly seen in children or the younger age group, it is due to the destruction of the beta cells wherein the insulin secretion is decreased. Okay, so though this is autoimmune disease, it can be attributed to both inherited risk as well as external triggers like diet and infection. Even diet and infection also plays a major role in case of type 1 diabetes mellitus. Of course, the genetic aspects are important here. So the hunt for these genetic as well as environmental risk factors is continuously ongoing in the area of type 1 diabetes mellitus. So if you see the timeline of discovery, we can classify these eras into pre-Jivas, Jivas, and post-Jivas eras. So pre-Jivas, you can see that there were single genes which were studied with their risk for type 1 diabetes mellitus. During the Jivas era, there was quite an increase in the number of genes which have been associated with the risk of type 1 diabetes mellitus. And in the post-Jivas era, they have been able to identify genes which have been associated with the complications of type 1 diabetes mellitus as well. So there has been a tremendous progress in the number of genes which have been identified and have been shown to have association with the type 1 diabetes mellitus. So there has been a genome mapping as well. We can see the several locus on the chromosomes have been mapped, and it has been shown to have an association with type 1 diabetes mellitus. Of these, the important ones are IDDM1 and IDDM2. Probably these two I'll be discussing a little in detail. The rest of the ones we will just glance through it. So coming to IDDM1, this particular locus, which is present on the short arm of chromosome 6, it is a region which encodes for the HLA antigens. So as we know, HLA antigens, we have class 1, class 2, and class 3. Class 1, mainly the A, B, and C, which is present here. Class 2, we have DP, DM, DQ, and DR regions. So these genes, they encode for the glycoprotein, that is the major histocompatibility complex, which is found on the surface of most of the cells, and they help us to identify between the self and the non-self. Okay, so that is the main function of these particular genes. As I told you, that HLA genes which encode for the major histocompatibility complex, so the one which kind of helps us to identify the self and non-self. So this is very important when there is the foreign antigens which are infecting our cells. So that time these will trigger the immune response and help us to help in the defense mechanisms. So the class 1 MHC, they present the chains from inside of the cells, and class 2 MHC, they present the chains from the outside of the cells. So whenever there is any kind of foreign antigen, it binds to this and it can trigger the immune response. But alternatively, in case of autoimmune diseases, such immune responses can be triggered even when it comes across the self antigens. Okay, so this HLA region has been studied by quite a number of scientists. So they have identified several regions, several alleles in this particular regions. And you can see here, they have identified alleles which show positive association, that is susceptibility haplotypes, which increase the risk of an individual to develop diabetes, type 1 diabetes mellitus. So these are the class 1 alleles, and this is the class 2 alleles here. Also, there are alleles which have been shown to have negative association, that is a protective haplotype. So if individual has this particular haplotype, then probably that person is not at a risk of developing type 1 diabetes mellitus. So type 1 diabetes patients usually at least have one of these alleles, that is DR3 and DR4, which is found in almost 95% of the individuals. And both of them, DR3 and DR4, they are particularly susceptible to type 1 diabetes mellitus. And in contrast to this, DR2 allele, it is shown to have protective response against diabetes mellitus. So also the studies have been done wherein they have stratified the HLA infants and try to assess their risk for type 1 diabetes mellitus. So they've stratified them based on their family history for diabetes, type 1 diabetes mellitus. So ones who did not have any family history, ones who had at least one first degree relative with type 1 diabetes mellitus, and infants who had more than one relative with the type 1 diabetes mellitus. So if you see the percentage risk for type 1 diabetes mellitus, the one who has protective HLA, they kind of have no risk for the development of diabetes mellitus. With neutral HLA antigens, probably they have a risk which is similar to that of the general population. But with the presence of these HLA alleles, then the risk, a percentage risk of them to develop diabetes mellitus kind of increases. Okay. That is the without any family history. But even with family history, you can see that with mother, father, and sibling, they have a kind of increased risk for type 1 diabetes mellitus. If an identical twin is there, then that risk with type 1 diabetes, then the other twin has to encounter this type 1 diabetes increases quite tremendously. And with HLA alleles, they have been shown again increase in the risk of type 1 diabetes mellitus. And then with additional risk factors with multiple relatives and the presence of these HLA antigens, the risk increases multiple folds. Okay. So among all these alleles, as I mentioned, the DR3 and DR4, they are the ones which are more specific for the person to develop or a person to be at risk for type 1 diabetes mellitus. So these actually what is their role in the pathogenesis of type 1 diabetes mellitus. So mainly they kind of these genes encode for MHC, as I told you, and these are the antigen presenting molecules, and also along with pre-proinsulin and CTLA4 in the TREG cells, you can see them here, and also the several cytokines which are released from them, they kind of can go and attack these B cells and destroy the B cells. And of course, as I mentioned, even viral infections and increased levels of type 1 interferon, they also destruct the B cells and increase the chance of developing type 1 diabetes mellitus. So there also has been proposal of, they have proposed the central and the peripheral hypothesis. So in case of central hypothesis, it is mentioned that in the thymus, the HLA proteins which encode for the risk alleles, you can see here, they kind of allow the autoreactive TCRs to escape or to survive the thymic selection. Okay, so they kind of survive all these T cells which have more of autoreactive TCRs because of the presence of this risk allele in the HLA. They kind of escape the thymus selection process. And even in the peripheral regions, so these HLA proteins encoded by the risk alleles, they have higher affinity for the critical autoantigens, and therefore they are able to efficiently induce this autoimmune responses. So this is the two hypotheses which have been proposed, mainly the central and the peripheral hypothesis. And this shows why HLA with its risk allele can be important in the development of type 1 diabetes mellitus by inducing this autoimmune responses. So next, moving on to the second locus, that is IDDM2 locus, which is present on the chromosome 11. So this INS maps to, and it contains the insulin gene. Okay, so INS maps to the chromosome 11, and it is present approximately between 2144 to 2148 kilobases. Mutations in case of INS that has been shown to cause this rare type of diabetes mellitus, which is kind of similar to the maturity onset diabetes in young. Okay. So there are several variations which are seen in the INS gene. So you can see this is our INS gene, which is present on the short arm of the chromosome 11. Not only SNPs, here VNTRs also play a role in the susceptibility of both type 1 and type 2 diabetes mellitus. It has been shown to be increase in risk of an individual for both type 1 and type 2 diabetes mellitus. So this particular gene, as I told you, it is the insulin coding gene. So we all know the synthesis of how insulin is synthesized. For the benefit of the students, I'll just go through that in brief. So insulin gene, it initially codes for the pre-proinsulin. So you can see here the presence of the pre-proinsulin. So the mature messenger RNA initiates the synthesis of the N-terminal signal protein, the B chains, C chains, and the A chains. Okay. So once the pre-proinsulin is going through the process of maturation, so the signal molecule is removed, and then what remains is the B chain, A chain, and the C chain. Okay, so once it enters the Golgi apparatus, it bind the A chain and the B chain, they kind of bind together with the help of this disulfide linkages, and then the C peptide is removed by the proteolytic cleavages. So we can see here inside the secretory granule, you have the mature insulin which is formed, and the C peptide is removed. So C peptide is the one which is quite stable, and we in the lab kind of estimate the levels of C peptide to get an idea of how much of insulin is secreted by that particular person, because the short life of insulin is very less. So insulin is kind of, we cannot rely on that result. So that is why in the clinical lab, what we do is the C peptide estimation is done there. So this is how that gene, the insulin INS gene, which is present on the 11th chromosome, is involved in this encoding of the insulin protein. So several, as I told you, several SNPs have been mapped on this region. This particular INS gene, it has got axon 1, axon 2, and axon 3. And axon 2, it encodes for the signal peptide, the B chain, and to some extent the C chain. Okay. And axon 3, it encodes for the A chain and the rest of the C chain here. Okay. So these are the some of the SNPs which have been listed in the region of this particular gene, which increases the susceptibility of the person for developing diabetes mellitus. So along with this, several other regions, SNPs have also been found in the INS region. And as I told you, it is not only the SNPs in the INS region, it is also there are VNTR, that is variable number tandem repeats, which are present on this gene, which also is kind of shown to be associated with the risk of type 1 diabetes mellitus. So this risk area or the locus is localized on the region which is flanking. It is not within the insulin gene. It is on the region which is flanking the insulin gene. So it contains short sequence of DNA that has been repeated many times. Okay. So this repeats kind of are found 0.5 kb upstream of the site where the transcription of the INS gene begins. And there have been shown 3 classes of VNTR which can be present on the INS gene. So I'll show you these 3 classes, that is class 1, class 2, and class 3, which is better represented in this picture here. So this is the INS gene, what you can see here. And the VNTR region lies here about 0.5 kb upstream of the start site of transcription here. So the 3 classes, class 1, class 2, and class 3. Class 1 has about 20 to 63 repeats, class 2 about 64 to 139 repeats, and class 3 has about 140 to 210 repeats. So this VNTRs being on the non-coding region, it influences the diabetes risk, probably because of alterations in the synthesis of insulin mRNA. So that is, it can downregulate or upregulate the synthesis of this mRNA of insulin. So as it's mentioned here, the VNTR probably affects the transcription of the insulin gene in some way. And in case of the class 3, you can see the production of insulin is more in the thymus, but less in the pancreas. And this is kind of rare but protective. But in case of class 1, you can see that insulin is production in the thymus is less, but more in the pancreas. And this is quite common and predisposing towards type 1 diabetes mellitus. So rest of the alleles, the locus, which you can see here, IDDM3 to IDDM18. There are various regions on the chromosomes they are mapped to. So, and various studies have been shown that they are at risk for type 1 diabetes mellitus. So that IDDM1 and IDDM2, they have been identified by studying the susceptible genes using case control studies. But the remaining susceptibility locus, that is IDDM3 to IDDM18, they have been discovered after the the genome era evolved. So they have been discovered by the genome scan linkage studies, and various regions, and there was a surge kind of in the number of genes which have been associated with type 1 diabetes mellitus. So of these, one thing which I would like to mention is a CTLA4. So this is a gene which encodes for the molecule that hinders the activation of the immune cells. So this has been mapped to the long arm of the chromosome 2. Okay, so the region of the chromosome that contains CTLA4 has been linked to the susceptibility of many autoimmune diseases, including the type 1 diabetes mellitus, and it has been mapped to the long arm of chromosome 2. So about 24 SNPs in this locus have been studied by 2 different technologies, and both the technologies have shown a kind of similar association of these SNPs with the risk of type 1 diabetes mellitus. And of I would like to mention one of the SNPs which has shown the highest risk here, that is RS 231727, which is present in the 3' flanking region of the CTL4A locus. So this has been shown to have an increased risk for the type 1 diabetes mellitus. And but still we are not kind of sure of which genes probably will be there in a person who is suffering from type 1 diabetes mellitus. So they need to expand the studies and kind of have a comprehensive resequencing of all these to arrive at the conclusive results as such. So that was about type 1 diabetes mellitus. So now I switch gears to type 2 diabetes mellitus. So you can see here again the 3 countries where the type 2 diabetes mellitus incidence has been reported to be very high. About 415 million adults aged 20 to 79 years, they have been shown to have type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes mellitus worldwide. And about 46.5% of them, they live in these 3 countries, that is China, India, and the USA. So the type 2 diabetes mellitus, there are several factors which are important, which can predispose a person for type 2 diabetes mellitus. So we have the increased body weight, the level of physical exercise, smoking, alcohol consumption. These are all the lifestyle factors. Along with that, we have also the genetic predisposition, gene environment interaction, also the epigenetic changes which are involved. So several genetic predisposition is also there in case of type 2 diabetes mellitus. So a person having a positive profile for all these things, he'll be normoglycemic and will not have any risk for diabetes mellitus. But a person with a negative risk profile, for example, increased body weight, less activity, physical activity, or smoking, along with some genes which predispose the risk variants in that particular gene, they can all induce the beta cell dysfunction and result in insulin resistance. There may be peripheral insulin resistance, wherein the uptake of glucose from the adipose tissue and the skeletal muscles will be reduced, as also the insulin mediated glucose production, that is gluconeogenesis in the liver, may be increased. All these put together will lead to hyperglycemia in that particular individual. Okay, so this type 2 diabetes mellitus is seen usually in the elderly population, but of late we have also seen type 2 diabetes mellitus in the younger population as well. So once the beta cell destruction and insulin resistance in the liver, skeletal muscle, and adipose tissue occur, there is hyperglycemia, which leads to excessive amount of glucose circulating in the blood. Okay, so this is in brief about the pathogenesis of type 2 diabetes mellitus. So in type 2 diabetes mellitus, it is the family linkage human genome studies which have been done to identify the risk alleles which can be predisposing the family for this type 2 diabetes mellitus. So the entire members of the family members are scanned, and these family have to be followed up for several generations, and large number of affected SIP pairs were studied. So 2 or more affected individuals of the same family, or affected and unaffected individuals from the same family. So it is by large scale genome studies, this was, so genome sequencing was done. So finally they excluded the variants that were not shared by the affected individuals, and that alleles which are present in the unaffected individuals, so those were excluded. So association between the parts of the genome and the risk of developing diabetes mellitus were looked upon. So they excluded also the non-coding variants, and the coding variants that were found in the databases that were not kind of rare, so they had, which had a frequency of more than 5%, that was excluded. And then the test for segregation, that is the alleles which segregate in the affected individuals of the family were studied. So test for segregation of identified genetic variants with the disease phenotype was studied. And then The sequence variants in the ethnically matched controls were tested for, and then only that these particular genes are associated with the diabetes mellitus was they could conclude with this. So with using this approach about that is when in the pre-Jivas era, so only two genes, that is calpain 10 and hepatocyte nuclear factor 4 alpha, this was identified by this method, and it has been shown that these two genes having the particular alleles were at risk for developing the diabetes mellitus. So what is calpain 10? How does it act? This was the first one which was detected, but of course this is not the last. Several genes have been detected after this particular gene was identified as risk for type 1 diabetes mellitus, type 2 diabetes mellitus. So you can see here when the glucose is entering into this is in normal conditions. When the glucose is taken up by the cells, the metabolism occurs and ATP is synthesized. ATP is kind of used to pump out the potassium from the cells, and the calcium influx takes place. This calcium influx, once it happens, it tries to move the vesicles to the surface, and along with the help of calpain 10, the vesicles open up and secrete the insulin to the circulation. So this is when the normal way how the calpain has its function on insulin release. Okay, so when there is, so recent studies, they have shown that along with this, calpain also has a critical role in beta cell survival. So here what happens, there are several intracellular stores for calcium, and one of these stores, it contains the calcium channel that are sensitive to ryanodine. Okay, so in beta cells, by blocking this ryanodine, it initiates a pathway which activates the calpain 10 to induce apoptosis and trigger the cell death in case of the beta cells. So this is how the calpain is involved in the metabolism. So it also plays a role in the insulin release, as well as it results in the apoptosis of beta cells when there is any block in the calcium levels. So several SNPs on the calpain gene have been identified, and most of them, the SNPs which have been linked to type 2 diabetes mellitus, especially in the Mexican Americans, were located in the non-coding regions of the gene. So you can see here, this is one of the SNP which is very important, the SNP 43, which is there in the intron 3. Okay, so this high-risk genotype is SNP43, which is having the GG of genotyping, and also SNP found in the 6th intron, that is SNP19, and the 13th intron, that is SNP63. All these three together, they have shown to interact and affect the risk for developing this type 2 diabetes mellitus. So the another one, HNF-A, it kind of this HNF4 alpha, it has several functions. So to mention what is important for this particular diabetes, so it is involved in the normal functioning of the liver as well as of that of the pancreas. So patients with the inactivating or any mutations which are present on this HNF-A, they exhibit alterations in the liver function. Also, it has been expressed in the pancreas, and largely confined to the development of the islets as well as SNR cells in the pancreas. So it plays an important role in the development as such a normal functioning of the liver. So again, here we can see that several SNPs have been mapped on this particular gene, and some studies have suggested the SNP which is located on the P2 promoter region of HNF-A has been associated with the diabetes susceptibility. And there's another region that is between on the Q arm of the 20th chromosome between 1,2 to 1,3 region, that also has been shown to have different susceptibility loci in different populations. So as I told you, it has to be a population specific, because every population will not have a similar genetic makeup. So some populations, it has been shown to, a different gene has been shown to have susceptibility to diabetes mellitus. In another population, a different gene has been shown. Okay, and there's another gene, that is PPR gamma, which we have been studying in the lab, this particular gene. So this is a key regulator of fat cell differentiation. And here, this PPR gamma, it shows to, it has been shown to increase the transcription of GLUT2 and the glucokinase genes. It increases the transcription of these genes, and it helps to maintain an normal glucose homeostasis. Okay, so this PPR gamma, not only for fat cell differentiation, not only in the lipid metabolism, also in the glucose metabolism, it plays an important role. So in this particular, there's a region here, which the amino acid proline at the 12th position, if replaced by alanine, has been shown to increase the person's risk for diabetes mellitus. So we have been studying this allele, but I have not been able to show the results of that study because it is not complete yet. But there is again a controversy here. Some of the case control studies have reported that the proline alanine is kind of protective, and some studies which have been shown in a different population that alanine allele has been protective, and proline allele has been shown to have risk for type 2 diabetes mellitus. So as I told you, there is a lot of controversial results which are there with regards to genes as well as with respect to alleles also. And now in the recent years, we have seen quite an explosion of the genetic variants, and also the variants which are showing risk for diabetes mellitus, as well as the variants which are showing protective effects against diabetes mellitus. So because of the technological advances, we have the genome-wide association studies, we have the next generation sequencing studies. So with this advancement in the technology, there has been a big number of genes which have come into play. And today almost about 120 variants have been convincingly replicated and found to have association with the type 2 diabetes mellitus as such. So we're coming to diabetes mellitus and the oral health, and if at all there are any risk variants which determine the whether the diabetic patient will have risk for any kind of oral pathology. So I just searched the PubMed with these keywords, diabetes risk variants and periodontitis, but I could find only 2 papers here, and that too one which was published in 2009, that it showed the genetic susceptibility locus for coronary artery disease, which was not relevant to what I was searching for, but only one study which showed that association of type 2 diabetes mellitus and periodontal disease susceptibility using the genome-wide association studies. So that this too was done in the Brazilian population. And here what they have used 3 groups which they have taken for this particular study. They had the control group and the one which the group which had periodontitis, and the third group which had diabetes mellitus and periodontitis. So this particular group had they, with the help of genome-wide association studies, they could kind of narrow down to 5 alleles which were shown to have increased risk of the diabetic patients developing the oral pathology. So among this, the last one, CD2B, this particular SNP, that has been shown to be associated with poor glycemic control and severe periodontal conditions. Okay, but still they have mentioned that this has to be further investigated. And probably this was the latest study which was published. That is, it was published in 2021. That is this year. So I think there is a lot of scope for the dental colleagues also to take this up further probably and see the various genetic factors which can predispose the diabetic patients to oral pathology thing. So coming to the future directions, we can see here a lot of genes which I told, a lot of loci have been identified to have showing risk for type 1 or type 2 diabetes mellitus. But in all these studies, the Asian population or the Indian population representation of our population is quite less. So you can see this green area which is there here, that is the one which shows the South Asian population. Apart from that, we have no much data about the Indian as well as the South Asian population. So I think as it is shown, what we can see from the previous studies also, there is these are all population specific, and you cannot generalize the data what has been got through one particular study to the rest of the population. So it has to be verified in that population also, because the genes are quite diverse in the various populations. So and also there was an excellent review in the Nature which has shown what kind of workflow can be followed to kind of understand the biology of diabetes mellitus. So what resources can be used, and what kind of goals can be achieved, and the various workflows, like what forward genetics can do, what reverse genetics can do, what target validation can do. So they have shown it very well in an diagrammatic aspect, that this kind of studies have to be done to kind of understand the biology of the diabetes mellitus better, because none of the SNPs what has been shown to have the person's risk for diabetes mellitus has actually come into clinical practice. So when we see a patient of diabetes mellitus, definitely we do all the other investigations like the biochemical investigations, and if at all we have to see for their nephropathy or retinopathy. There are several various other investigations, but never has been a physician ordering for any genetic investigation where I want to see what his genes are telling. So that kind of a scenario has still not come into clinical practice. So probably there is some gap which is still existing, though so many studies have been done, but definitely there is some gap which is there, which needs to be filled actually. So we have the databases now which are existing, but that also has to be evolved. So earlier we had the researchers performing different various experiments as to publish the data, and the readers used to read those data and get an idea about what the work in the field is going on. And now it has been evolved to this publication, along with the data being deposited in data repositories, where also these readers can access both the repositories as well as the publications. But what is required probably is an interactive portal where the consumers of the data, they specify some complex analytical workflow which are carried out on the data, with each of these data repositories being interconnected to each other. So it is like with one database, what is there. So we have to have an interaction between all these portals which are available. So this can enable a broad community of users to carry out the custom analysis and progress towards understanding the biology of type 2 diabetes mellitus or any other disease for that matter. So this is something which is required, an interactive portal where these readers who access the data from the data repositories, they can analyze through various other repositories, and they can even publish those data in a separate kind of a publication. So to conclude, as we know that diabetes management or prevention should aim to incorporate the genetic and molecular screens, so that we can tailor some specific treatments and optimize the benefit for the patient. So that kind of scenario has still not come into clinical practice, but we probably hope to see that day when genetics is actually involved in the clinical practice. And also we require large scale studies wherein the influence of various genetic variants on the drugs which are taken by the diabetic patients, how it is going to influence their glucose homeostasis can be studied, and these genetic variants may have a clinical utilization in the field of pharmacogenetics. So also we require the integration of all the omics, that is because we have this technological advancement and the reduced cost now, but I may not actually say reduced cost, but of course from what it was previously, yeah, now the cost has definitely come down, but still we are probably not that much access to these kind of omics, but hopefully in future we will have more access. So an integrated assessment of various omics, that is genomics, transcriptomics, proteomics, metabolomics, and the microbiomics. This also is coming to a lot in practice now. So a large cohort study can be done with taking into consideration all these omics to get a holistic view of the disease state. So with this, I would like to conclude. Thank you for the opportunity given. If any questions, I'm ready to take it.
Thank you, ma'am. We got to know so much about genomic mapping, gene influencing, insulin, PPARs, and SRP, SNPs. Panelists, kindly present your views on the topic. Over to you, ma'am.
Akila ma'am, it was an interesting talk, and there is no question in the Q&A, and I understand that because unfortunately in India we don't consider genetics as part of any of the fields. So it is a field which is entirely kept as an outcasting field where we don't include it within biochemistry or dentistry or medicine. So I think that is also a little clear with the Q&A session. Nobody has asked any question. But going over, I think since you were explaining about the autoimmune disorder associated with type 1 diabetes, but if there are patients who have genetic defect in type 1 diabetes, how would you clinically differentiate it between the two? Because most of the time, nobody goes for a genetic testing.
No, nobody goes for it. Very few centers have this actually as their first line of investigation for the patients. But when the person does not respond to the treatment given, usually this metformin or glipizide which is given to the patient, when the person does not respond to that and has high levels of glucose in spite of taking this drug, it is then that is suspected that probably that person has got some kind of genetic component involved. But again, it usually depends upon the high suspicion from the physician's side and his orientation towards genetics. So awareness, in fact, rather than to the general public, I think awareness should be created among the doctors so that they think of genetics. Otherwise, it is never thought of actually. A person, a treating physician never thinks about any defective genes as such.
I think at this point, I would like to bring into point the insight of Anita ma'am of, taking this topic into the webinar, because last 3 days we were discussing about the microbiome, oral health, how about, the influence of the microbiome on the oral health. But I think it's a real insight of bringing genetics part of diabetes and into this webinar specifically. So thank you, Anita ma'am, for that. But moving on, I think let me ask you one more question, Akila ma'am. So what, this we have been talking, but how important is it to have the knowledge of genetics for people who are in clinical practice? And what implementations have been done so far to make it a part of the clinical practice?
Yeah. Actually, it is very important because it is earlier it was thought that only these rare disorders have some genetic background, and it is a single gene disorders like cystic fibrosis or these kind of disorders which have a genetic background. But now, of late, we know that it is not only these kind of diseases, monogenic disorders which are there, but even the polygenic disorders. I mean, the complex disorders, they have a genetic background. So like, as I said, diabetes, but not only diabetes, even congenital heart disease, or even the hyperlipidemia. So some family, the lipid levels have been, or cholesterol levels have been high in a family as such. So why that particular family has got increased risk for atherosclerosis or dyslipidemia. So there could be something genetic in them. So there is a need to kind of make the physicians aware that you have to think of genetics, but as such, what efforts have been made towards that, probably such webinars will help, or maybe the early, I mean, the students in that student level, if we can do something so that they are more aware towards genetic, because now, as such, if I see in the MBBS or the BDS curriculum, there is no mention of genes or genetics being there anywhere. So probably we have to have some efforts towards that and kind of make them, because once they're set into clinical practice, it is like kind of difficult to make them align towards this. But maybe from the beginning, if we can induce some knowledge in them regarding genetics, then it would really help in the long run. Otherwise, if the treating physician does not accept this, then it will not reach the public.
Okay, there is one comment from the panelist, Dr. Vangara Anirudh, who says your talk was very informative and interesting. Following that, Dr. Tejavati Nagraj is asking that, can you give a take-home message, what take-home message can be given to patients by a clinician as a preventive measure?
Okay. So, yeah, for the patients, with respect to the genetic aspects of diabetes, as I told you, the physicians, for them to understand it is kind of difficult. So I don't expect the patients to understand as such, but definitely what we can tell them is that if your family is at risk of any kind of particular disorder, probably there should be some involvement of the genes, and at least the lifestyle modifications can be incorporated in them quite early, so that they can at least prolong this, because when they are having this risk allele in them, then kind of totally avoiding the disorder may not be possible. So at least they can do some kind of lifestyle changes to prolong this particular aspect. So maybe the severity and the delay can be kind of brought about in these kind of patients. So uh, we have to tell them that there is something in the family, so some defect in the gene probably. So that is the reason why your family members are at risk for diabetes mellitus or any other kind of disorder. So it kind of applies to all disorders. So there are, as I told you, there's polygenic diseases, complex diseases are all polygenic. There will be a genetic background behind it.
There's on the same line, there is a question by Kokila. Her question states that in case the parents have, because we were talking about the heredity and the genetics involved, in case the parents have diabetes, what are the chances of kids getting it? So she just want to know, does it vary between the son inheriting it and the daughter inheriting it? So
no, I think doesn't differ between the sex, because these genes, whatever I've mentioned, is not on the sex chromosomes, X or Y chromosome. It is on the autosome. So both will have the similar kind of risk. Either it be the daughter or the son will have the similar kind of risk. But depends if, yeah, if one of the parent is having diabetes mellitus. So yeah, there is a chance, but you cannot as such predict how much chance unless you have the entire genetic makeup of them. So that is important there of both the parents. Probably if you have the genetic makeup, unless we have that, unless you pinpoint those particular genes that is also present in the child, without that we probably will not be able to tell what is the risk of that child to develop diabetes mellitus. But as such, without the genetic makeup also, we have seen that the mother having the diabetes mellitus, definitely the child also will have diabetes mellitus at a particular age. So there has been kind of high risk for that particular child to have diabetes mellitus as they grow as an adult. So that there is a risk is what is known, but the risk is due to which particular gene, especially in the Indian population, is not being studied as such. So probably we'll have to do something. Institutes who have got the genome sequencing facilities are at this. They are studying these. And Indian specific databases, there is an effort to do this Indian specific databases, like how the UK has done the database for their population as such, and most of the studies have been done in the UK population. So as such, Indian population specific databases are required, and of course there is efforts from the central institutes like IG, IB and CSIR institutes where they are doing the 1000 genome project. So probably once we get to know the Indian specific genome signatures, and of course, even in India, we have the North Indians who are kind of a different genetic makeup when compared to the South Indians. So it is a challenge in India to have a common database as such.
So just to keep the discussion open to all the participants, it's a general question or just out of curiosity, because for the periodontal disease, as we see, there are various risk factors. So the last previous days we were discussing about the microbiome, but there are other epigenetic and genetic factors that are involved. So any of the the dental colleagues who are here in the platform could tell us, what do you refer to the genetic testing to be done in the patients when they approach you based on the the clinical practice you do? So, or in general, how it is carried out?
Well, that's a nice question, Dr. Divya. When we have these aggressive form of periodontitis, where you have a lot of redness, in layman terms, where you have a lot of bleeding, that is gingival index or a bleeding in sulcular bleeding index, which is high, with deep periodontal pocket depth and clinical attachment loss. We do at times, with extraoral lesions or without extraoral changes, we do look at DR levels, HLA levels. To report a few cases, I have done a HLA study on these aggressive forms of periodontitis and the psoriasis group of patients which have periodontitis. So we have done those HLA, AB, A9, A10, and the DR, this thing that we look at. So in general, it is aggressive form, but we also look at chronic periodontitis where we do have a genetic predilection as compared to others, because there is a similar amount of etiological factor, which we call the oral plaque biofilm, with supra or subgingival plaque. So there is an enhanced clinical changes intraorally, which per se we're talking of periodontitis. Yes, we do investigate on HLA levels, DR levels, AB, 9, 10, etc.
Okay, that's
I
interesting
think
to know,
it is
ma'am.
a valid reason. I have done 2 studies. One was on psoriasis, the other was on aggressive periodontitis.
Okay. Akila ma'am, there's one more question for you to shed light on. Selva Kumar Jairaman is asking you to, say a few words on the relationship of metabolic syndrome and genetic disorder.
Okay, metabolic syndrome, and yeah, again, it's metabolic syndrome is a complex disorder wherein you have increased triglycerides, elevated blood pressure, and the body mass index different. So each of these components put together comprises this metabolic syndrome. So each of them individually will have definitely some risk alleles there, but as I told you, these are all evolving fields, and any particular area of the genome has not been pinpointed for any particular disorder. Either it be metabolic syndrome or diabetes mellitus or coronary artery disease. It has not been a kind of pinpointed to any particular disorder. So it is difficult to comment on that, whether there is any, definitely it has a genetic basis, but where, what, how, when, it's difficult to tell there. And that similar goes to the next question also, I guess. So
yeah, I think Maria has put up a question. Thank you, Maria. It's a personal question and it does take courage to put up in a public platform. Thank you for that. But still taking your question, she says grandparents were diabetic and then followed by your parents, and presently she is also type 2 diabetic. But her question is, she has also said that she's from South India, Tamil Nadu. So what is that susceptibility or probability of her son getting this particular genetic disorder?
That's the same explanation probably goes in there also, that kind of it is difficult to comment on what panel of genes are involved, because large scale studies on the Indian population have not been done, because when I was searching through the databases for various publications, so it was not I was not able to find for the Indian population what kind of genes are susceptible to, but yeah, it is kind of difficult to say that what genetic susceptibility testing or what target gene panels would be recommended for this, because we have it for the rare disorders, but we don't have it for the complex disorders.
Okay, I think on a similar ground as Selva Kumar is asking, does AGE and genetic disorder has anything a common role to play in diabetes?
Age and genetic disorder.
Yeah.
You mean to say probably only with the age, or any disorder along with the age is, I'm not able to
The
understand what.
question is not very clear. Since he has capped AGE, I'm sure is he asking for the glycated thing, or
Okay.
is the age? That's my confusion too, because he has abbreviated. I used acronym for age.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think let's move on with, I think, Anita ma'am, you can take up this question because it's more specific to periodontology, where Advitya is asking you that when we talk about the oral manifestation in the light of periodontology, our question is, rampant caries has very few etiological factors. Is there any genetic correlation between diabetes and rampant caries? So I think Advitya is from Kolkata. Any of the dental faculty who are there, because it's more specific to the dentist. So if anyone want to take up this.
Ma'am, we can move on to the next question. I think Dr.
We'll take that question. Like we said, there is immune deficiency, which explains to rampant caries. And since genetic relation is always there with periodontitis or dental caries, there is a causal relationship between dental caries and humans, because there are a lot of influencing factors that we talk of. There was a Zucker's rat study, which was studied in non-diabetic and diabetic patients. So there is a causal relationship that they say that exists between caries and diabetes. Of course, like you were talking of throwing light on periodontitis or the gum disease, yes, there is a correlation, be it periodontitis alone or periodontitis with diabetes. Of course, there is a correlation. This article was presented in 2014, so you can check it up. And you can check another article by the UMIA University. That would explain pretty much the patterns of these rampant caries.
Akila ma'am, I think what AJ was, I think what our guest was right. The person is asking about the glycation end product and the genetic.
Actually, we are talking of the allelic variation of PRH1 and H2, the proline-rich proteins, where they're more susceptible to Streptococcus mutans from the faulty eating habits that we talk of, along with poor oral hygiene routines. So these combined together and the genetic susceptibility are definitely a correlation in the diabetic group of patients in rampant caries.
Okay. As a final question, Akila ma'am, can you take this up? I think Selva Kumar, I think that was a question from him. Yes. Yeah. The age, it was the glycated end product, I guess was correct. So the relation of glycated end product with genetic disorder.
Yeah. Probably I've not gone through whether there is any genetic background for the accumulation of ages and this one, but with the general aspect, what I would like to say, yeah, probably it does have, but there I have not seen the studies which have, or refer to the studies. Probably I have to go through more in detail about that to kind of answer, but yeah, it could be there, but I'm not sure about that.
So I think so far those were the questions.
Ma'am, I have something to say. Ma'am, can we actually do this salivary study of these protein salivary agglutinin or the DMBT1, like we were talking of, or these allelic variations in salivary thing? to actually look out for, because there was one research study by Nicholas Stromberg with 452 children, and they have found that there is a high risk in those group of patients. So I was thinking that we could have these studies and probably intervene at an early age to prevent these rampant caries. We can have reduced dental costs to the parents, and probably we could identify the high risk group of patient at an early age, allow dentists to put in oral hygiene habits. I mean, give them advice on that, and actually look at early caries or which require restorations. I think that is an avenue for research. What do you say, ma'am?
Yeah, I think we can do it, but in the saliva, I mean, oral cells which have been shedded to the saliva, probably if they're in good numbers, we can isolate the DNA from it, because to do any kind of genetic analysis, we need the DNA to be present. So whether the DNA will be there in the saliva or the cells which are, if we have certain cells in the saliva, so have you seen, I mean, assessed?
Well, I haven't done that in the saliva levels, but I think that gives us avenues for exploring research for undergraduates, postgraduates who are interested in that this thing, because it has been done in the salivary levels. I mean, salivary proteomics, that's what we're talking.
Okay, so that's what, like, if at all there are genes, I mean, sorry, the DNA present in the saliva or any cells which are shedded to the saliva, then we can isolate the DNA from the those cells, and this DNA can be used for analysis. But the presence of DNA is important.
Yes, ma'am, I agree with you.
Yeah, I think research has been done using saliva isolating DNA. I think in the Indian setting, what matters is how well we collect the sample.
Yeah,
The storage is the main criteria for selecting, because most of the time at room temperature they collect. What time do you collect? How do you store it? Do you store it at 4° immediately and put them in -20 and -80, or degrade the DNA by the method of processing itself? Is one of the demerit faced in the Indian setting.
Yeah, we have a hospital scenario like where ma'am works. We have our -80°, right, ma'am, where we store. So that kind of storage should work. And you have these centrifuge kind of bottles, those fiber bottles, screw capped, that can also work well, because we're storing that and analyzing it at a stretch. I don't know. That's what I feel, because that is what I have worked on for HPV or my interleukin levels in this thing. But I've not looked at the proteomics per se, like ma'am was talking of the genetic material.
I mean, most of the time we go back because of the cost.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, the funding and the cost is something which we have to double think before we proceed. So
yeah, wish and hope we have the funding for all this work, and hope Akila ma'am and you give us the best backup for our SIG group. It gives me lots of thoughts into where we have to look for in our SIG group, or to have students geared in for our research wing of our SIG group.
yeah, I think Advita is adding to it. Saliva glucose biosensors are coming up. So I believe the question of how credible will it be?
Yeah. Earlier, I think last 2 sessions back, we had talked about that.
Okay. I think with no further questions, we can wind up the session. If there's anything else to be followed up, please proceed.
Thank you, Dr. Akila ma'am, and thank you, Dr. Divya ma'am. I request Dr. Akila ma'am to accept the certificate as a token of appreciation. And I also request Dr. Divya ma'am to accept the certificate as a token of appreciation. So we are almost nearing the end of our webinar series. And also we are having the list of the prize winners for the poster competition that we conducted 10 days back. I request Dr. Kishore sir to please announce the name of the prize winners. Over to you, sir.
Today we have Mahesh sir from Curiprox who will be announcing the prizes, and I request Dr. Anita ma'am to take over. Thank you.
I thank Dr. Mahesh, Dr. Kishore and team for giving us this awesome backup at our webinar series, and predominantly the real win or the arrangement towards what is required of our UG undergraduate e-poster competition. It was really a great pleasure to work with them because they are always open to giving a motivation through their support of awards. So thank you, Dr. Mahesh, Mr. Mahesh and Dr. Kishore and team. It was great working with you. We continue to partner with them for postgraduate session at a later stage. Now, to announce the winners, can we have the next slide, please?
Basically, we have the first category, that is original research. I now request ma'am to announce the first prize.
Well, the first prize goes to A Spark is All You Need to Ignite the Excellence. So they ignited and fired us up because that was our pre-webinar series. They dressed up their PowerPoints so well. I congratulate Chilukuri Sai Shrija and co-author K. Usha Chandrika for winning that along with their guide, Dr. S. Vidya Sagar. Congrats, Dr. Chilukuri Sai Shrija, Usha Chandrika, and Dr. S. Vidya Sagar. I thank you all for participating in our poster competition. It was a great pleasure from our end to be co-partnering with Curiprox. I think they are from Kamineni Institute of Dental College, and the topic was periodontitis versus diabetes. Is there a tie-in? The next award goes to Amrita M, who's guided by Dr. Sri Shaila, HS. And the topic is cytophotometric study of exfoliated cells of buccal mucosa in type 2 diabetic patients. It's guided by Dr. Vidya GD, not Dr. Sri Shaila. It's by Dr. Vidya GD. Sorry for the error. Congrats, Dr. Amrita and Dr. Sri Shaila. Now coming to the review series, we have announced 3 prizes, and the first prize goes to Harshita Kumar, guided by Aniruddha Malik. Congratulations to the author and the co-author. Is Harshita Kumar and Aniruddha there? Okay, we go on to announce the next winner of these UG poster competition. The author is Dr. Meenu Kumari, and the co-author is Dr. Meenu Kumari and Dr. Ishani Das from Dayanand Sagar College of Dental Sciences. Dental vision as an, I think the topic I've little missed. Congrats to Dr. Meena Kumari. It was on dentist vision as an eagle's eye on diabetes. Now coming to the last award of the poster UG conference, the author was Sanjana Bhatt Pooja US, presented by Vaibhavi R. Shetty and guided by Dr. Chandini S. Congrats to all your team. We appreciate all the efforts that all the colleges and everyone, your guide, yourselves have done to actually send the abstract at the earliest dates and actually be there for the poster presentation. Thank you all and continue to expect the same. I request your guides to actually help us with putting our postgraduate competition also on the forum. Thank you all. I now hand over to Mr. Mahesh and Dr. Kishore. Thank you, Mr. Mahesh. It was a great honor and pleasure to be actually working with you and co-partnering with you.
Meanwhile, can I request the panelists to give their remarks? regarding the 4-day webinar series. We have had a beautiful moment altogether. All the speakers were excellent in their talk, and I hope everyone has benefited the 4-day webinar series. Thank you, sir. I think, sir, you can go ahead now. Over to
Yeah,
you.
thank you. Sorry for the technical error we had. So good morning, one and all. An old English says goes, a good start is half done. Through this poster competition and webinar sessions, half the work is completed in enlightening public and dental fraternity about illness and management of diabetes. We at Curaden would like to be associated in this noble endeavor in the second of as we till this reaches the logical conclusions. Many congratulations to all the winners. On behalf of Curaden, I take this opportunity to thank JSS Aher Special Interest Group, Head of SAG, Dr. Anita, Dean of JSS Dental College, Dr. Ravindra Shivamurthy, HOD of Periodontology, Dr. Deepika, Professor Dr. Sheila Kumar Gujari, resource persons, and everyone who directly and indirectly contributed to this session on killing the killer diabetes, a kaleidoscope. Last but not the least, Dr. Kishore, my beloved colleague, Head of Curaden Academy, my heartfelt thanks to all the coordinations you have taken care since beginning. Thank you. Would also like to acknowledge teaching and non-teaching staff for their unflinching support and coordination. Our heartfelt thanks to UG and PG students for their active participation. We really appreciate such initiatives and the efforts taken to organize such a high-impact webinar in series. I hope most of you have come across the brand CuraProx by now. CuraProx is a Swiss premium oral care brand with more than 140 oral hygiene products available in India. I request everyone to use CuraProx, personally experience it, and then recommend to CuraProx to your patients. In future, we would support like to be a part of more such programs. I once again thanks everyone for making this program successful. Wishing you all a very good day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mahesh Kumar and Dr. Kishore Hadal for all, like I was saying, for all the backup that you've given. I personally thank every one of you who's registered and our group of speakers and panelists. Thank you for the great backup and interaction and participation in our SIG group of webinar series. And hope to continue the partnership with Curadent or CuraProx. And I especially thank Dr. R. Sumukh Bharadwaj, who, in spite of having his father being a little too sick and operated on, gave us the best backup from the technical team. I also thank my UG and postgraduate team who have always given my backup. I also thank Dr. Kushalappa sir, our patrons, Dr. Suresh Bojraj, sir, our pro, our VC sir, Mr. Dr. Surinder Singh, Dr. Manjunath B, our registrar sir, and it was a great inaugural also by H.H. Pramoda Devi Vodiyar and all the people assembled there who gave us the kind of backup that they did. And of course, we also had all these people, enthusiastic UGs and PGs who registered, and the UGs who gave us the Ignite and fired up and had a lot of nutritive, brain-oriented food for our brain, nutritive brain with, or rather the hypoglycemic brain that we today end at. We continue to have a partnership with Curaden, and it was great interacting with all the speakers that were there and all the panelists that were there. I thank them all personally. And of course, my Deepika PC ma'am, and of course, all the faculty and students of JSSH and UGPG, and all the other. Special thanks to my poster convener and scientific convener, Dr. Sunit Shetty. Thank you all for belonging here. We will continue to have a webinar or lectures. We will send email or stay by. We will send our PG postgraduate, PG or the postgraduate July, third week or fourth week. Thank you all once again, that backup, that support, because I used to call him, at odd hours and ask him for the kind of backup that I did for the student prizes. Thank you once again, all of you. I think we can wind up, sir.
I thank everyone for participating in our 4-day webinar series. Thank you all and have a great day. And congratulations to all the winners. Thank you. I also thank the speakers and the panelists for sharing the valuable knowledge during these webinar series. Thank you all. Have a great day. We are winding the session now.